Look at the Greenlaw thing from top to bottom, and maybe we can get an answer on this here in a matter of hours, because he is going to be the recipient of the Dwight Clark Award. So that means Dre is going to be, I hope, not limping through the building here.
Yeah, good call.
In a matter of hours. But maybe the most under-discussed item of the entire 49ers offseason is Dre Greenlaw. I didn't see the 49ers go into the draft or late on the back end in free agency and replace Dre Greenlaw. Yet I have major questions about who Dre Greenlaw is going to be, at least in the first half of this season. I know Aaron Rodgers set the table for, hey, Achilles now take 4 hours
exactly.
to heal. And so maybe this guy's just going to be his normal self week 1. But I have a hard time believing that, even if it is healed and he can put a uniform on and go out there and play. That's challenge number 1. But as every doctor has ever told us, when you do the Achilles or you do the ACL, that mental hurdle of going back out on the field and trusting it, hell, look at all the conversations we've had through the years with Klay Thompson.
Right.
To act like Dre Greenlaw is A, going to be ready week 1, and B, going to be himself anytime soon is a big assumption.
Right.
And what is the 49ers plan B at that position?
Good questions, all. And I honestly, for Dre Greenlaw, I'm looking after the bye, which would be week 10. Take the first 8 games. You've got games 1 through 8, and go ahead and take those off of the table. And then if you're looking at week 10 coming out of the bye, that would be October, which would be about 8 months after the injury and after the surgery. So that, for me, feels like an aggressive time for Dre Greenlaw to even come back. And in the meantime, linebacker-wise, you've got Fred Warner. But as I was mentioning during the crossover, you're a team that doesn't play as much nickel as other teams. But when you do play nickel, you need a second good linebacker, and I'm not sure who that's going to be.
We just pulled up the 49ers base depth chart.
Okay.
Just to play around with this a little bit. And I just wanted to let everybody know, maybe some developing news. Dre Greenlaw has been listed as questionable.
Okay.
For week 1. He's questionable. So's Talanoa Hufanga. By the way, so's Charvarius Ward. And I'm kind of like, what's that all about? Dre and Talanoa were way more hurt than Charvarius. But anyway, the other names that are out there, we know who's a part of this team. We know Flanagan Fowles. We know Fred Warner, obviously. Right. But the names that are sitting there right now, from Curtis Robinson, Devondre Campbell, Ezekiel Turner, D. Winters, Jalen Graham, there's a lot of linebackers on this roster. The 49er fan base doesn't know any of these guys.
Right.
They don't know what these guys can do. I don't know if the 49ers know what these guys can do. This is a massive featured position. There are many people in NFL circles that believe that Fred Warner has largely been tabbed as the best linebacker in football because he's next to Dre.
Exactly.
And that goes both ways now. That's not to say that Fred is a product of Dre, but the fact that the two of them are both so prolific makes life that much more prolific for each of them. Their own talent combined with the talent of who's right next to them. So the trickle-down effect for this linebacking core is going to be massive if he's there or even if he's not himself.
Well, when he comes back, and he won't be himself, at least immediately, and you mentioned it, the comeback is not as instant as, okay, now you're healthy, now you're back, you're 100%. There's a certain ramp up, and there's a certain amount of getting comfortable again, especially when you play like Dre Greenlaw does, and when you play the position that he plays, which is he has to be able to plant and move in all directions. It's not a straight line here and there, like even a pass rusher. Nick Bosa, for example, when he tears the ACL, there's a certain amount of movement he knows he needs to have. Not a lot of back pedal when you are a pass rushing end or a defensive end. It's usually either forward or in or to the side. If you're going backward, that means you're probably getting blocked, and it's not a good thing. But if you're Dre Greenlaw, you've got to move in all directions, and his whole game is built on explosion. So I think it's going to be, I would hate to say the whole year before he gets back to being what he was, but it's going to be a lot more difficult for Dre to get back to where he was based on the position he plays.
Lucas, remind us next Tuesday, next time Doc Pandy is on, it's probably time, especially after we, fingers crossed, talk to Dre today.
Right.
Would love to get an updated conversation on where he's at, and what the realistic possibility is of Dre Greenlaw playing week 1, playing week 10, playing 2024. If he does play, what is it? What mental hurdle does he need to get over? What percentage version of Dre Greenlaw are we going to see? I really think that this is kind of an under-discussed portion of the 49er offseason so far. So,
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, well, we could throw this out to our audience, too, 888-957-9570, especially after looking at that schedule come out and now having a conversation about tonight's award winner, Dre Greenlaw. Like, what are your fears this year about the San Francisco 49ers based on where we sit today?
For me, it's primarily the defense because of, the losses that you've had, including Dre Greenlaw. Can Hufanga come back and be as effective as you need him to be? And you got a new defensive coordinator who I don't believe has ever coordinated. So, Steve Wilks, whatever you want to say about his season, he had credentials.
Yes.
He's a guy who's been around the league for 20, 25 years. He's a guy who's got pelts on the wall, and now you go to Sorensen, who's never done it at this level, and you've got a defense that's a little bit more depleted than it was, and you're going up against really, really good offenses. Miami, Buffalo, I know they don't have a well-established receiving core, but they've got a great quarterback, and you mentioned all the good quarterbacks you're going to face, and you've got Mahomes again. I think when you look at this year, I'm more concerned about the defense than I am the offense, certainly.
Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, we look right now at the history of the 49er defensive philosophy, which has always been up at the defensive line first and then work your way backward, right? They've got a great linebacking core, but I'll never forget that year, the year before the Super Bowl, when the Niners had, I think, 2 interceptions the entire year.
Right.
And then the exact same defensive backfield came back the next year, and they were fantastic. And what the 49ers showed was if you've got a dominant defensive line, you can turn that secondary, a mediocre secondary, into a really good one, because it's simply all about how many seconds does it take to get to that quarterback, how quickly can you get that quarterback uncomfortable. And if I look back on the 49ers season, it's hard to say this because they went to the Super Bowl, they went to overtime in the Super Bowl, they held Patrick Mahomes in regulation to only 1 touchdown, they did all these wonderful things. They were one of the better defenses in football. And I still look at them and I go, that defensive line underperformed. They're better than that. They could have been, should have been even better than that. So I'm really interested to see this signing of Leonard Floyd,
right,
letting Chase Young go and turning that into Leonard Floyd, and whether he stylistically fits, like what Rod was just saying on the phone, does he stylistically fit opposite Nick Bosa, and is Javon Hargrave allowed to come in and be the free agent signing we thought he was going to be last year? All these guys had flashes. They need to be more consistent. If they can do that, just those guys, I'm focused on those guys, then I think this defense can look like its old self, even more dominant than they were last year.
And Eric Armstead out and Malik Collins in from Houston. Is that an upgrade? And with a new scheme, can Javon Hargrave perform better than he did last year, where maybe it was the scheme, maybe it was the people around him, but it looked like, to me anyway, he didn't play as well as advertised. If the front four, and you mentioned Leonard Floyd, if he can come in and be more of a game wrecker than what you had there last year, maybe we are less worried about who plays linebacker for Dre Greenlaw.
My answer to this, and again, 888-957-9570, what are your 49er fears this offseason as we sit here today in May? It'd be too easy, I think, to just be like, well, health. I'm worried about injuries. That's a constant in the NFL, but there's a specific portion of the health centered around one guy that for me is my biggest concern and sort of my hope going forward. And it centers around Christian McCaffrey. You watch how many times he touches the ball and the way he plays, and even what happened to him last year, what he played through, and how many times he had to walk off the field, whether it be Cleveland and then surprisingly come back the very next week against Minnesota. You remember what he went through. He's another year toward 30, another year later in that contract, and we know the history that he has had. He has struggled with it at times. And so I look at his health, his number of touches, his age, and then also what the Niners are trying to do in the receiving core by drafting a receiver in the first round, and having a young quarterback that now is going into his third year. I would love to see the 49ers start to rely on Christian just a little bit less. Just a little bit less. Not a lot, a little bit less. Do you like the running back you got in the draft?
Right.
Does that work out?
Isaac Garendo.
Can you spread it out a little bit, but can you also start to give a little bit more responsibility to Brock and become a team that instead of going 49% pass,
right,
can you be 53% pass?
I don't think so, Mark.
And you might be right.
Yeah.
But that would be my hope. And it's not because they need to do that to win. It's just a little less reliance on Christian.
I get that.
Feels like the right way to go.
It does, but I also can picture, I can close my eyes and stuff and picture, what Kyle Shanahan is going to do and stuff. And, when you get into tight spots and, you got a 20-17 game with 13 minutes to go in the fourth quarter and stuff, and you're thinking about how do we win this game? It's going to be Christian McCaffrey. And Kyle Shanahan has shown that he's not one to play around. He's not one to trifle with, well, let's get Eli some extra carries. Jordan Mason, TDP, the dude barely played, and now he's gone because Kyle didn't think that he was good enough. And I can Danny Gray you, and I can Ray McLeod you from last year, and there are reasons why those guys didn't get a shot. It's because Kyle Shanahan doesn't believe that they can make the plays that he wants made. Kyle Shanahan has a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to guys who aren't good enough or don't run the right route or don't block the right way. Whatever it is that these players don't do that's good enough, Kyle doesn't want to suffer through those sorts of fools, quote-unquote, and so you're going to see, I think, the same amount of McCaffrey because he gives you the best chance not only to win the game, but win the play.
We're closing in on